Welcome to the INSEAD Perspective, Spotlight on Asia podcast. I'm Hasija, Dean of Asia at INSEAD, the business school for the world. In this podcast series, I have the pleasure of chatting with my colleagues at INSEAD, our faculty whose research and teaching covers a diversity of business disciplines, as well as the region's leading business leaders. Together, we'll dive into some of the most pressing topics facing business and society today, examined through the lens of Asia. To kickstart this series, I'm pleased to be joined by Hyunjin Kim, Assistant Professor of Strategy, who is based out of INSEAD's Asia campus in Singapore. Hyunjin's research focuses on how technology can help firms build competitive advantage, specifically how firms can leverage data and algorithms to improve strategic decision making. Prior to academia, she co founded and managed an early stage venture capital fund, and today she is very much engaged with industry, collaborating closely with Fortune 500 companies as well as tech startups in her research. Thank you for joining us, Hyunjin.
Thank you so much for having me, Samir.
If I get a little bit deeper into the thesis that you have, again, roughly speaking, technology can allow you to do two things, right? It can allow you to either do things differently
Mm.
or allow you to actually do different things.
Mm-hmm.
And one is not necessarily better than the other, but my guess is that doing things differently can lead to some productivity gains, and that's great. Nothing wrong in that. But doing different things can fundamentally shift how businesses are shaped and developed, and the way they are interacting with their customers and the way they produce value. Where do you sit on where the aha of this technology is really going to be? Like, where do you think should be the CEO focus of how to best use this technology to reshape their business?
One of the things that have been most interesting to observe is that, like the many technology transitions that have come before, a lot of the focus in the early days of AI, whether that is like machine learning algorithms that we're talking about or generative AI, what we saw was that there's a lot of focus on thinking about targeting increased efficiency or productivity. How can we lower our costs? How can we do the same things that we do, but more cheaply or more easily? And I think that what has been really interesting for me, and just because of the nature of the research that I do, which is that I collaborate very closely with companies and work with their data to run experiments within their companies to understand what works. I've had the privilege of being able to advise and work very closely with some very exciting companies that are adopting AI. What has been most interesting is that, sure, there are gains to be found in terms of lowering costs and increasing productivity, but I think that some of the biggest shifts are coming from expanding the business in ways that wouldn't have been possible without AI, or thinking about completely redesigning your organization in terms of how you do business. So let me give you some examples. Like even actually before we get to generative AI, I think what was really interesting, for example, is in the financial advisory research space. And one of the most interesting things that they have been working on using machine learning algorithms, in the past few years, is because it is such a costly process to do that investment research. They have to be very careful about which funds or which securities they're going to have their very highly qualified analysts cover.
Hmm.
Now, what they're able to do with machine learning algorithms is they basically change their business model by basically saying, okay, there's going to be a subset that we're going to continue to cover with analysts, but now we can actually provide that information to and cover the entire set of securities around the world with it, like not just in terms of the score or the rating that they might provide, but now also thinking about the analysis as well.
Hmm.
And that actually completely changes and expands the scope of their business in ways that couldn't have been possible before. And I think that that's one of the most exciting shifts. And then when we turn to generative AI, I think then the door is really like wide open. And this is really where or this is really the key motivation and the inspiration behind why I founded the AI Venture Lab here at INSEAD. Because what I was seeing, especially with some of my work with Grab, where we've been working on designing AI agents to help the millions of small and medium enterprises across Southeast Asia, is that the way that we can build ventures from the ground up can be fundamentally changed and is fundamentally changing with generative AI. And what this means is that I think we can enable many more entrepreneurs that were able to build these businesses before. And especially for us, at INSEAD, one of the most exciting things for me is that what I've always seen is that there's so much talent and so many great ideas all around the world that are building solutions for their local communities. But there's so many challenges and frictions in the early stages of building those businesses that are really difficult to overcome. Even though, of course, there's been lots of communities and lots of investment that's been going on outside of Silicon Valley to replicate a lot of those models, it might be that it is still really difficult to find capital or even follow on capital. It's really difficult to find the right talent to build your business. It's tough to understand and get the right information and advice to scale up your business if you don't have the access to the right information. And I think what I've seen is that all of those things, like those frictions, can be bridged with generative AI. And not only that, there's new business models that can be enabled using generative AI. And this is sort of where I've been focusing on most recently, because I think that's actually one of the most exciting bits of what I'm seeing is that there may be actually new ideas or parts of the idea space that were not possible to pursue before, whether that was because the cost economics didn't work out or like the business model wasn't feasible, or what have you, that may now become feasible.
So, I mean, this is fascinating stuff, and just to get a little bit more clarity on how you're helping these thousands of ventures of these startups to build their businesses. Are you looking at how they can leverage AI or generative AI in particular in their operating room? Or is it more in the strategy room? Or is it a bit of both? And what I really mean by that is, are they building AI based businesses? Or are they using AI to build their business? Or are you kind of advising them on both?
I was bowled over by the excitement and the demand for the first virtual sprint that we launched called the AI Founder Sprint. And the main thesis and the motivation behind it was really about helping these ventures build their business with AI, not about necessarily helping them build AI products or AI companies.
Hmm.
Now, that said, of course, we got a lot of AI product companies that
Built
are
into
in
it.
our set, which is great that, we can help them both build their products as well as build their business using AI. But to share some of like where we've taken this sprint is really thinking about how can we anchor the curriculum not around the tools that they can use, because I think that's where a lot of the focus has been. Like, can I use Lovable? Can I use Bolt? Do I use ChatGPT? Do I use Claude? Um, to think about how do they reduce some of the costs, which like definitely we see. I have a new paper that's coming out looking at data from Y Combinator on startups that are AI startups versus not, where we're trying to understand, you know, are we seeing different patterns in how they grow? And one of the key things that we're seeing is that absolutely, we're seeing that AI startups have fewer employees
Mm.
compared to non AI startups. And the decreases are coming from um, especially their non technical. Like the proportion is larger in the decrease for their non technical personnel,
Mhm.
as well as more junior personnel, which is something that we've been seeing is very consistent across lots of research studies that are coming out. And that these AI businesses appear to be able to achieve higher valuation and funding numbers per employee, which is exciting. But one of the more exciting things is thinking about how does this affect their strategy and how does this affect how it changes changes the kinds of businesses they can build. And this is, early stage, but what we seem to be seeing is that AI startups are less likely to be marketplace businesses. They are more likely to be subscriptions-based businesses. Um, and what we've been doing in the AI Venture Lab is really thinking about, okay, how do we then break down, like, what is behind this? Like, what does AI really enable in terms of how you're able to build your business that is different?
Mhm.
And there's a couple of different components that I've been thinking a lot about and isolating. I think one, which is a straightforward place to start, is that because we're able to prototype and build more cheaply, and often without technical talent in the early stages of prototyping, using some of these tools like Lovable and Bolt, etc. um, the cost of experimentation is going down, which is something that we've seen more broadly with lots of generations of technologies. But I think that what's especially different is that like the both the magnitude and the type of change that's happening, in the sense that, for example, I have a startup that was building a technology for like medical offices, like to do their back office
Mhm.
stuff. And they were sitting with their customers or potential customers and like showing them like what the prototype looks like, and the customer was completely not interested. And in that moment, they actually started vibe coding into new features based on what they were saying. What I really want is a scheduling feature. And they're showing in real time what this could look like, which is not a real product,
Mhm.
right? It's just a prototype, but the fact that customers can actually visualize it makes a really big difference. And he was able to sign that customer like on the spot.
Mm.
So what that means is that the way that you acquire customers and the way that you can experiment with the feature space as you build changes. And so you can quickly prototype and think about how to get that product market fit, which is such an important part of building early stage businesses, much more easily with AI, which is one big part. I think the second part is that that is related to that is that you can then learn much faster over time. And so even though it might be that everybody has these tools and that they can also build those similar businesses, for those who are able to start early, and if you're able to experiment as you go as much as you can, you build in learning that you're just much further along on that learning curve about what customers want and how you can build out your product and your business, which is really interesting. I think the second one, which I think is almost more of a fundamental shift that I'm seeing, is that AI is enabling services-based models to be more scalable.
Mm.
So what I mean by that is typically you think about a services-based business,
Mhm.
and the cost economics don't look great in the sense that, for example, if you require salespeople, like an extra hour of a salesperson for every dollar of revenue you generate, then of course, like your margins are going to be at a much lower percentage compared to, say, a SaaS-based business, which
Mhm.
is why there was so much of startups and venture capital funding flowing for SaaS-based businesses. And what's really interesting is that there's been a number of companies that have been able to take a service. So, you know, let me give you some examples in a second, but take a service and basically productize it using AI, where they say, okay, what is the core part of the service that is basically mostly can be done with automation,
Mhm.
with some judgment. So it's basically automating a whole bunch of the grunt work and then using the human personnel to actually fix some of the edge cases.
Mhm.
Now, what this means is that at the very beginning, you still have to start out somewhat manually so that you understand all of the challenges in that services pipeline and you know which ones you can automate and
Mhm.
which ones you don't. And I think that the biggest pitfall that I often see companies, especially startups, falling into is they say, oh, we're just going to solve that with AI and automate the whole thing. That rarely, if ever, I think works, at least at this stage of the technology.
Mhm.
What's really important is figuring out what can you and should you automate using AI, and what should you make sure to keep in terms of those edge cases that your like very valuable team members are going to do.
Mhm.
And so what that means is that even though it starts manually at the beginning, over time, your cost economics moves from a more services business to a more SaaS-like business,
Mhm.
which is a huge gain in terms of being able to launch these businesses. So let me give you two examples. One is a company called Ranger, which was founded by Josh Yip. What they do is they automate the QA process, which is like typically manual, sometimes outsourced. And what they did was they basically automate. They have like a code artifact. They automate like the base of how to do those quality assurance tests,
Hmm.
which is what I know you know the QA test stand
Right.
for. And then they have human engineers that are actually looking over them to make sure that that the edge cases work, that there are certain tweaks that they need to make. And what's been really great is that then what they're able to do is turn what used to be a service, which is an outsourceable service for doing quality assurance, into basically a product that you can then sell as a subscription in a way. Another example that I really love, I just had a fireside chat for the founders in the AI Venture Lab this morning with, is Phase Shift. They are a recent YC alum. And Caitlin Lexana, who's the co-founder and CEO I was speaking with this morning, what they've done is automate the accounts receivable business, which is like a huge headache for lots of businesses, and very, very manual. You have to take those checks, you have to put specific numbers into Excel spreadsheets. And what they have done is built an AI agent workflow that automates a lot of that process of taking details from emails, from spreadsheets, from checks, and they've basically worked out the flow so that they know the base that is going to be automated using generative AI. But then there's the edge cases that the customer support folks are looking over. And of course, at the very beginning of the process, you need a customer success person to be able to work out exactly what the customer's workflow is going to look like. And so this, I think, is a super fundamental shift that not only applies for services businesses, but as we're teaching, or as I'm teaching these founders in the sprint, even if you're building a product-based company, you have services within your business that you can productize. So HeyGen, which is a generative AI company that is doing avatar-based videos,
Hmm.
and that's the product that they're known for. But their onboarding process is really great because once you sort of register, for example, they've customized that workflow so that you get an auto-generated customized video from the CEO, like welcoming you on the onboarding process. And so
Hmm.
what used to be an onboarding service has now been productized, and that changes the cost economics of a startup.
Oh, it's this is super fascinating stuff, Anjan. Thank you for sharing these stories as well as these insights with us. I want to come back to one of the points you had mentioned a little bit earlier. This is happening at a global level.
Yeah.
Is there anything in particular that you see that is exciting in Asia and in your observation? I mean, you mentioned earlier that yes, there are pockets of replication of what the mechanisms have existed in Silicon Valley, but perhaps not the same. And there is a lot of fragmentation in this market here. And you seem to suggest that this access to this technology, the democratization of this access, is perhaps going to allow for, even outside of outside of Silicon Valley in Asia, we think of Shenzhen, but perhaps now it can be everywhere and not just limited to Shenzhen and or Hong Kong or Bangalore in India. And this could be everywhere. This could be in Vietnam. This could be in Laos. This could be in Thailand. Do you see that happening? Do you see that trend, that uptake of this really taking this technology, building your ventures out, or corporates changing the way they operate in Asia and getting rid of those frictions? Or do you still think there's some time for this to catch up?
That's a super fascinating question. And I'm very excited to see how the dynamics shift over these next few years. I think there are two sides to thinking about that story, or at least as I see it now. I think on the one hand, in some ways, this has been this has led to a resurgence of Silicon Valley, in the sense that I see so much of the frontier in both adopting AI, building AI businesses, and building businesses with AI happening in Silicon Valley. And I think it's been re-energized in a way that, hasn't been seen for several years. And I think that a lot of the adoption is earlier, still there. At the same time, I think that the other side of the coin is that the opportunity is massive. I think, outside of Silicon Valley. And that's really why I've been so passionate about building this AI venture lab, and especially now, like earlier on, so that we can help disseminate what is happening and also share all of the frontier insights, not just in Silicon Valley, but that are happening from amazing founders all over the world to other founders all across the world. And the reason I think that the opportunity is in some ways potentially bigger outside of Silicon Valley is that if you take Asia, say outside of these big hubs that you've just mentioned, one of the big challenges has been capital. And has been labor. And if you're able to build more capital efficient businesses,
Mhm.
this is a really big opportunity for a lot of founders who weren't able to actually scale amazing ideas that they had.
And, I'm great to hear your insights. I completely agree. See, there has been this promise about the Asian decade or the Asian century for quite some time,
Right.
and it never really materialized, to be honest with you. I mean, again, there are pockets which have done excellently well, but then there are places which are still to catch up on that Asian promise. And I think the barriers that existed from delivering that, because they had a lot of ingredients, right? They have young population, they're very driven to achieve there's a fair amount of focus on education and skill development, but it just never materialized into something meaningful. And I think what was missing was this. What was missing was a technology that will allow them to be capital efficient, to to have a global reach and not be locked into a regional kind of focus, but more importantly, know-how. And what I really like about your venture lab is that it is creating know-how amongst a wide variety of folks who otherwise would not have access to this kind of information. I mean, one of the advantages of Silicon Valley is you just learn from really sharp people around you.
Right.
But now, with the example of the venture lab, you can start learning things sitting in Medan, and actually develop that kind of a know-how to build these businesses based on this technology, as long as you're driven and you're reasonably sharp, which I think you'll find a lot of those people who just didn't have the opportunity or even the exposure to do things like this. So I think the opportunity curve is changing, the exposure curve is changing, and clearly the capital requirement is changing. So I definitely agree with you that this is the best moment in time. Of course, we'll see. I mean, the proof will be in the pudding, which we will see down the line. But I would say if there was ever a good time for the Asian promise to come through, this is it. And it's fascinating work that you're doing. We're almost about reaching the end of our podcast, and I'd like to perhaps leave you with the last word. If you want to share something with our audience that can hopefully inspire them or give them some ideas on what they can do if they're sitting at the boundary, want to do something with AI, want to do something about their business, start something of their own, but just haven't taken the plunge. Is there anything you want to share with them, some ideas, perhaps some resources that they can refer to that could help them jump on this journey?
So I think one of the questions that I think get the most from my students, from the founders that I work with, is should I use Claude? Should I use ChatGPT? Should I use Lovable to build? Should I use Bolt? And everybody gets very hung up on best practices. And I think from what I can tell, this is still we're very much on the frontier, and it's I think very much still in the wild wild west, if you will, where we're figuring out this frontier. And the best way that you can learn it is by actually trying it out yourself. You should just try building prototypes, testing out different technologies and tools, because it's less about which tool you use, much more about actually trying things out and experimenting so that you continue to be at the frontier of understanding what these technologies can do and learning how to use them effectively, which takes trial and error and takes a lot of time to experiment with, rather than trying to figure out what are best practices.
Well, Hanjin, thanks a lot for sharing your insights and spending some time with us. Time was too short. I think I can talk to you for a much longer period of time. This is a series that we are running at INSEAD, so hopefully we'll be able to invite you back and continue this conversation as more of your research work starts coming out. We'll be able to go back and revisit some of the new insights that you get and compare them to where our thinking was today. versus the new insights that you develop. So hopefully we can have you back again. And thanks again for encouraging people to try and experiment more. I think it's crucial and very valuable. So appreciate the time, and hopefully we'll see you again very soon.
Thank you so much, Samir. It's always such a pleasure getting to chat with you and hearing the questions that you have in mind. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.